Awesome. Well, I want to appreciate everybody coming out today and listening to the information that was presented, and I hope that many of you have something to take away and the information that we received. I guess on my farm we have had a demonstration of different types of irrigation systems, and I probably need to be like Tiffany today. I probably need to have a disclaimer up here that says that I'm not a salesman. I don't promote any one system as other. Only thing I'm doing is I'm testing the system and looking at the different types of nozzles and trying to see which is the best and the easiest to irrigate with, and so that's kind of my disclaimer. So kind of what we've done is we originally started this in about 2011 and 12, and what made us really come up with this is that we seen a lot of farmers use broadcast spray versus the LIPA, which was the LIPA on the 80s, and using those Synerger 4 quads. And so we didn't really understand how come people was going to broadcast spray, which is kind of an inefficient system. And so on this pivot, we went to LISA on 80s, which is in close to the center, then PMDI. We have LIPA on 80s using the Synerger 4 quads, and then LIPA on 40s, which is a drop every 40 inches, and then the LDNs, which has the little hood on the top of them, and they're set up on 80 inches. And so that's kind of how the pivot has been set up. And we have cotton on one side of about half of the pivot, and seed sorghum or seed millet was on the other half of the millet. And so what we've done is how we harvest them. I would harvest each section at a time, and we had each section at a time ginned separately so we could keep track of gin turnouts and grade and quality. And so if you look at the LDNs on 80s and the LIPA on 80s, that was some of the highest yields, and the LIPA on 40s, the PMDI and the LISA spray was less. And so with technology, it's starting to get really interesting more and more and more, and so Phil Brown was practicing with a drone, and so he come out and we looked after we defoliated the cotton. We had a chance to look at each one of these regimes, and we kind of took some pictures of it from the air, which kind of really demonstrates and shows where the technology and what we can do with some of this newer technology. On the graph on the bottom, we've had two AquaSpy probes in every one of the sections. And one reason we did that is we put it one where the furrow, the seed furrow is, and we put one in the wet furrow where the water would be. And so I took these sections, and I didn't take an average. I took the seed where the seed furrow row was, where that probe was, and that's the information that I used. And if you looked, we pretty well followed along the regime of what their recommendations was. I did not use the AquaSpy probe to necessarily to give me an irrigation schedule. We used the PET network, and this cotton was irrigated at about 65% of ET. So that's what we did. If we look at the LIPA on 80s, it made 1,482 pounds, and it was ranked the highest. And the seed millet on the other side made about 1,650 pounds. On the LIPA on 40s, now this is a drop every row. The cotton yield was about 1,160 pounds, and the seed millet made about 2,100 pounds. If we look at the cotton LIPA on 80s, it was ranked second and made 1,470 pounds, and the millet made about 1,900. And I will share with you when we go through each one of these at the end kind of what our thought process is on them. The PMDI was 1,133 pounds, and on the cotton and the millet made about 2,300 pounds. And the broadcast spray, it made about 1,230 pounds, and the millet made about 2,025 pounds, and the broadcast spray on the 80s was definitely the easiest cotton to strip in the whole field because it was the shortest. So here's when we look at and what we did is I looked at the micronair, since we could take a composite of the average grade or the average loan value of each one of these sections. We took the bales that come out of each one of the sections and we looked at a average grade. And this is the micronair on how we looked at each one of those sections. And when we look at the micronair, we're looking at the maturity of the crop. And that's the only thing really micronair is going to look at that in this scenario. And we can see that the LDNs, the leaf on 40s and the leaf on 80s probably had the most maturity of the crop compared to all the rest of it. Then if we look at the loan values, and I'll show that, and that's what the loan values of those. So when we look at the summary of it, and kind of the takeaway, what we look at each one of these sections is different irrigation delivery systems produced different yield results, even in a wet year. You know, we can't look at just one year that the information that we receive, that we can tell you is good in just whether it's a wet year or dry year, but we've seen some variabilities this year compared to the previous years. But you know, our results are probably the same even in a very wet year. The two irrigation delivery systems that produce the highest yields delivered water on an every row basis. And so what we're thinking and what we're looking at is some of the longtime pioneers of water management of Dr. Dan Krieg and Leon New and some of these guys that's worked a long time in the water management when irrigation systems started coming about and we started talking about LIPA and every other irrigation. You know, it kind of goes back to that scenario that we're not wetting the whole soil profile. We're just wetting sections or every other row of the soil profile. And so when it comes to cotton production, especially in a scenario that we were in 2017, when we had probably the least amount of heat units that we've had in several years previous, and cotton was not maturity, especially from the type of rainfall we had in those 2 or 3 weeks, and we can put it all kinds of scenarios of what happened, but the 2 or 3 weeks that we have no sun in September definitely affected the maturity of the crop. And so I know that every producer in the high plains of Texas has experienced the same thing. But when we look at promoting maturity from an irrigation standpoint and from a PET standpoint, the every other row irrigation application appears to be the best. And in a wet year, such as we expect in 2017, a dry row on the LIPA on 80s minimized vegetative growth. It was not quite as growthy as the rest. And like I'll say, it's kind of been my experience. My disclaimer on this deal is it's been my experience on the rest of our operation that we use LIPA on 80-inch rows or every other furrow. And we definitely try to stay away from the broadcast spray mode as much as we possibly can, and just because of the efficiency state. And I know I didn't use all my time. I'll try to catch up some time, but if there's some questions or thoughts, I will be around here. If you have some questions, I'll be happy to try to answer.